Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my world. I had too much sugar this morning and you've got to deal with it. Let's go.
What's up, guys? She-Hulk episode 2 just dropped on Disney Plus. So today I'm going to be reviewing the episode, breaking down what happened within this episode and what it could mean for the MCU in the future. And then looking at what I think of the series as a whole so far and what I think we can expect from the next few episodes. So before we begin, remember that this is just my opinion. You're entitled to your own opinion. So please let me know what you thought of She-Hulk episode 2 in the comments down below. And with that out of the way, let's kick right off. This episode picks up where we left off last episode, with She-Hulk revealing herself in the courtroom to stop Titania, who had burst in. And this episode picks up with the news coverage of that event. We find out that Titania is a social media superpowered influencer who was apparently at a traffic hearing when she attempted to break out and was stopped by She-Hulk. And we get a funny little sidebar during the media report that says that her lawyers are claiming it was just due to low blood sugar.
That's original.
We'll see. We know we're going to get more of this character in the future. That's a pretty funny excuse if that's how her powers work, but we'll see in the future. But yes, she turned into She-Hulk, and there's an interview with a reporter and some guy who is in the courtroom, and they kind of christen her as She-Hulk, and the name catches on. So She-Hulk goes into a bar in her Hulk form, and she's approached by her boss, and her boss tells her that because she turned into She-Hulk and saved the jury's lives during the trial, GLK&H, the opposing firm, has had the trial declared a mistrial. They argue that the jury will be biased towards She-Hulk's side now because she saved their lives. So then her boss lets her go, says she's too much of a liability, and fires her.
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
And I found it interesting within this scene, She-Hulk's in her Hulk form, and then she turns back into her Jennifer form, and she says that they have different metabolism rates, so she starts acting drunk when she's in her Jen form. And I found that interesting because it didn't really match up with what we had been told in episode 1. Episode 1 seemed to indicate that just because she was a Hulk, she had a different level of metabolism and could process things at a different rate than your average human. So I found that a bit of a continuity error, but we'll see if it's clarified in later episodes. But yes, so she has been fired, and she goes from law firm to law firm trying to get them to pick her up as an attorney, and they continually tell her she's too much of a liability and they don't want a sideshow, so they keep turning her down. And that's when she goes to family dinner, and before she goes to family dinner, she's in what I presume is her apartment, and she's with Nikki, and they're trying to find job openings for her. And while She-Hulk is looking at on her laptop a page of 10 odd jobs that people can get, we get a couple of very important references within the sidebar. The sidebar gives links and titles to a couple of other articles, and they have important implications for the MCU going forward.
Roll, please.
We've got first one article references, it asks, why is there a body sticking up out of the ocean? And this is an obvious reference to Eternals, where Tiamat attempted to emerge from the earth, and the Eternals kind of froze him solid. So obviously his body is still there in the ocean. But the much more important and, in my opinion, more exciting reference is the other article that reads that a man with metal claws was in a cage fight. And this is obviously a reference to Wolverine, our favorite mutant from the Marvel Universe with the ability to stick metal claws out of his hands.
You picked the wrong house, Bob.
And And ever since Miss Marvel officially introduced mutants to the MCU, everybody's been kind of wondering how they're going to bring in mutants and the X-Men and incorporate them into the MCU. And this article seems to indicate that the mutants have been in the MCU all along. They just maybe haven't come out of hiding or been the focus of our story as much as the Avengers have. But that's very interesting, has some important implications for the future. But we move on, and She-Hulk goes to family dinner, and her parents are there, her aunt, her uncle, another female, I believe, that we don't get identified, and her cousin Ched, who was referenced in episode 1. And we get a couple of important things within this scene. We first find out that She-Hulk's family is aware that Hulk saved the universe, that he snapped his fingers, which indicates that they, and perhaps the wider MCU as a whole, might be aware of a bit more of what the Infinity Stones are. We don't know how much the people know about this at this point, and of course it's just possible that they only know about this because they're related to Bruce, and that it's not common knowledge for the rest of the MCU's population. But it is interesting to see just how much people know about the Battle of Earth and the events of Endgame. But anyway, She-Hulk's mother then tells her that there's this guy who works with the mom and that he wanted to be a superhero. So she gave him She-Hulk's number. And I thought this might be a reference to Frogman, perhaps. We know Frogman's going to show up at some point during this series, and I just found it interesting the way they make it so clear that this guy wants to be a superhero, but they don't give his name or any other kind of information. But I definitely think it would be funny if just this guy that works in the supermarket turns out to be Frogman, and he's just out there, starts saving the world and all of that. But yeah, She-Hulk has a family dinner, and her dad pulls her aside and talks to her. And She-Hulk has an awesome dad.
Way. No way, no way, no way!
And recently in the MCU, we've been kind of seeing a lot of better fathers. I mean, with guys like Howard Stark, we didn't really always have the best dads within the MCU. And then we've got Ego and Thanos and Vulture, just a lot of messed up dads.
Well, duh.
But it was good to see kind of a nice, friendly, genuinely loving father-daughter relationship within the MCU. But yes, She-Hulk leaves the family dinner and she goes to a bar. And then one of the partners in GLK&H approaches her. And GLK&H, again, is the law firm that was responsible for getting the trial called a mistrial. So they're basically responsible for getting her fired. But this partner comes and asks She-Hulk to head up their new superhuman law division. And She-Hulk accepts. She goes into the office and she finds out that she's expected to be in Hulk form all the time, and that she was hired really to be the face of their superhuman law division. They wanted the Hulk to be on their merchandise and whatnot. So I find it really interesting. While she's walking through the building, she breaks the fourth wall. She speaks directly to us. But unlike in the last episode where she had to clear out the room before she could talk to us, or when she did it and Bruce was right there, Bruce heard her talking, nobody seems to be aware of her talking within this instance. So either they're kind of breaking the continuity of how they've said her powers work, or maybe I've theorized that it could possibly be because Bruce and Jennifer are both Hulks, there's something about their power set that allows Bruce to hear her break the fourth wall, or something like that. Perhaps it could just have to do with Hulk having powers is why he was able to hear her break the fourth wall. But absolutely nobody notices here. The partner that's showing her around just keeps talking like everything is normal. So it's really interesting. And then she goes into her office, and Nikki's there, and they're examining the office, and Pug comes in. And Pug, played by Josh Segarra, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who also played Prometheus on Arrow, great actor in that show.
I'm 10 steps ahead of you and you haven't even figured out what game we're playing yet.
But he comes in and he's been described as kind of this fan guy. But yeah, he's one of those fan guys, so he comes in and brings them a welcome basket and whatnot. But after that, she's in Holloway's office. Holloway is the partner who hired She-Hulk, and he assigns her to be the attorney on Emil Blonsky's parole. And of course, Emil Blonsky is the Abomination who we last saw him in Shang-Chi, which actually factors into the end of this episode. But we remember him from, he was introduced in Incredible Hulk as one of the main villains of that film, and he was taken away and has presumably been kept in captivity for the majority of that time period. But She-Hulk is like, she has a conflict of interest, but Blonsky, it turns out, has specifically requested her as his attorney. So she goes down to the Department of Damage Control facility, and we get to see more of the DODC kind of from an altruistic standpoint this time. They're just doing their jobs. They're not going after people yet, but I do think they're going to be kind of a more antagonistic entity as the season goes on. But she goes and she sees Blonsky, and he's back in his Blonsky form. So he's learned by this point, we presume, to transform between his Abomination form and his Blonsky form. Because we do see in clips of teasers and trailers that he's able to transform between modes. But he's a very different Abomination than the one we met in The Incredible Hulk. He says he's kind of on a spiritual journey. He makes references to his soulmates who have brought him property for him to use once he gets out of prison. And just, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the way they've kind of changed characters within this series. We already had Hulk, who I felt like, and I mentioned in my episode 1 review, is a lot more goofy and a lot less of this serious, respectable hero that we had come to know from other MCU projects. But with Blonsky, they took it even further. He's acting all spiritual. He says namaste to She-Hulk and just seems really goofy and emotional and just not at all the Abomination that we've previously seen. But yes, he mentions that he was under the influence of the Super Soldier Serum, which might play more into later in the season. She-Hulk seemed to take a particular interest in the idea that he was only the rampaging Abomination because of the government's actions. So we may see that play into her battling the government a bit later on in the series. But she leaves the prison and is trying to decide whether or not to represent Blonsky, so she calls Bruce. And she calls Bruce, and he mentions that Abomination wrote him a nice letter, and they made up. And he also, there's a bit of a joke. He says that he's a completely different person, literally, which of course is true because in The Incredible Hulk, it was Edward Norton playing Bruce Banner, whereas Mark Ruffalo has now taken over the role ever since the Avengers. So he is quite literally a different person.
That joke.
But that's a funny joke. But the biggest reveal from this phone call is Jennifer asks Bruce if he's going to be visiting her in LA anytime soon. And Bruce says no, he's got stuff that's going on. And the camera pulls away to reveal that he is on that Sakaran messenger ship that caused the crash in episode 1. So obviously Bruce is hooked up with this messenger ship and it's taking him somewhere to deliver him somewhere, presumably back to Sakaar. And this is very interesting because I've seen some rumors and theories going around that it might be this ship is delivering the information that Hulk has a son, because it's very reminiscent of the comics where Hulk was found to have a son that he had on Sakaar during the time that he was a gladiator there. So certainly they could be adapting that storyline, but we'll see how that plays out in the future. I'm not certain that they'll reveal that Bruce has a son within the She-Hulk series just because he's not the main focus of this series. But it definitely provides potential for a spin-off or a later project. But anyway, Bruce hangs up the phone and She-Hulk agrees to represent Abomination. So she calls in to Holloway and tells him that she's taking the job, and he says, "Great, but take a look at the news." So she says, "Okay." She hangs up. She turns on the news, and it's the clip of Abomination fighting Wong from Shang-Chi. And it's all over the news. They're saying that there's a controversy being stirred up because apparently he broke out from prison and was taking part in an illegal underground fight club, which we know is true, but we don't know quite what the circumstances were behind that, if it was a prison break or he was allowed to do that. And I expect this is how we're going to wind up getting Wong within the show. Perhaps he's going to be called in, maybe subpoenaed to give testimony or interviewed as a witness, and that's how we'll kind of incorporate him into this series. But that's where the episode ends. We do get a post-credits scene where we just see She-Hulk helping the family with various projects. She lifts up the car so the wheel can be changed and brings in a ton of water and things like that. But that's pretty much it for this episode. So shifting into my thoughts on the episode, I definitely enjoyed this episode more than episode 1. I said in my previous review that I thought it was just that the first episode was an origin story, and I'd enjoy it more once we got to the legal comedy side. Well, we're shifting into the legal comedy side, and I'm definitely enjoying it more. This episode seemed to figure out the tone a lot better. I don't feel like it made quite as many jokes, but the jokes that it did make definitely landed better than the jokes in episode 1, at least in my opinion. So I thought this was a much better episode tonally. I didn't love what they did with Abomination, but outside of that, I thought all the rest of the characters were portrayed interestingly. I definitely thought that She-Hulk was more likable within this episode. I remember saying she was a bit of a smug jerk in the first episode, and I didn't really like how mean she seemed to be acting towards Bruce. Definitely better within this episode. So I really enjoyed this episode, and I think in the future it's really just going to be a kind of case of the week series where we see different cases being taken on. I expect we'll kind of wrap up most of the Abomination storyline within the next episode, but that might be a continual back plot thread for the rest of the series. I think we're going to definitely see an episode with Frogman. I think we're going to see just some episodes with different superhumans being approaching She-Hulk and asking her for legal help. I'm definitely waiting to see what Daredevil's going to do and how he's going to be incorporated into this show. But this was an awesome episode. I gave the last episode a 6 out of 10. I'd say I'd give this an 8 out of 10. So a definite improvement. Alright, well, those are my thoughts on She-Hulk Episode 2, which is available on Disney+. Episodes drop every Thursday. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, and hit that notifications button. We really would appreciate it. And I've got something exciting to tell you guys. There are going to be some changes coming to the Brothers Fleming in the next few weeks. We're trying a new approach. So we're going to be rolling out less videos as we try to adjust for this big change. But when that change does come, and you'll find out what it is later on, we hope you'll be really excited to see it. So just be patient with us while we figure it out, and you'll find out more later. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, adios.